Well, let's go ahead and get started. Really glad to see everyone here. We're going to jump straight into interactive mode within the first 30 seconds of this class. So, asking a question: why do you think people walk away from Christianity or never approach Christianity to begin with? Non rhetorical question.
Great question.
There's more than one right answer. I don't know all the right answers. I'm just kind of gathering input here.
Why do you think people walk away from Christianity?
Yeah. What's an example?
I think people feeling judgment
Yeah.
from Christians or having bad experiences with
Yeah.
other Christians, and maybe the way they live their life, they want to keep continuing it that way, and Christianity doesn't necessarily accept that. Or people say that Christianity doesn't accept
Right. So cultural fit with lifestyle, for example. What other reasons might there be? Confusion? Mm-hmm. Tell me more about that. Like, in what way?
People being taught different things in different places and then being
Yeah.
confused about
Mhm.
what's really
Yeah.
confusion.
Hang on to that thought. Come back to that.
Because they're not necessarily well grounded in what their
Yeah.
beliefs
Uh-huh.
are.
So some theological misunderstandings, for example. Yeah.
It requires effort.
What do you mean by that?
Well, everybody's busy and it's something you have to be intentional about.
Yeah. Uh-huh. For sure. Definitely. Yeah, just a few kind of categories of what you're talking about here. So, like the moral, cultural objectives. I don't want to change my lifestyle. There may be some intellectual problems that they might face. How could a good and loving, perfect God actually allow evil to happen in the world? The negative experiences with Christianity, maybe someone that they knew was a Christian, they didn't treat them very kindly, and other forms of intellectual doubts. So, and there are other reasons as well. I just kind of threw some up here. You guys spoke to many of them already, but I just wanted to affirm that there are a lot of reasons that people have a challenge with Christianity. And part of this class is to not shy away from those. Good morning. But rather to actually strike these head on in part of this class. So we're not talking about abstract, philosophical things, but real world issues. Yeah, David.
In 1 John verse 6, it says, if we claim to have fellowship with him, yet walk in the darkness, we lie and do not live out the truth.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of a cognitive dissonance. If I'm playing Christianity,
Yeah.
there's kind of a cognitive dissonance there. And so I don't like you because you might judge me,
Mm-hmm.
type of a thing. You might find out who I really am or whatever.
Yeah.
And so rather than relying on Jesus' death on the cross, I try and kind of cover up my sin.
Yeah. Definitely.
Which is uncomfortable.
It is, right? Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a later class, but absolutely. I mean, the point is, there's a lot of reasons. There's times that at least I might feel like I don't know how to respond to those experiences. Like, I had a bad experience with a Christian person, and what do I say about that to try to help alleviate that situation? So those are some of the real world questions that we're going to talk about in this class. Not necessarily all today, of course, but throughout the time that we have together. And the Bible actually calls us to engage with those thoughts respectfully, and we'll see that play out in a little bit here. So why this class? So why should we even bother trying to think about our faith? Because some people might say, well, you should have a blind faith. Isn't it more holy and spiritual to just believe blindly what you believe? And there's actually biblical evidence that contradicts that. We'll get to that in a moment. There's also good scientific, philosophical, historical, experiential reasons for believing in Christianity. And this class, just to be clear, is not all about math and science, but when that comes up, I'll walk us through it. But really, it's about trying to help us have more confidence in our own faith and in our ability to speak to others about our faith, whether it's they're struggling or they're skeptical or they're not even a Christian yet themselves. So as I mentioned, the idea here is that by grounding our faith more firmly, will open doors to faith for the unbeliever to be able to answer their questions, to be able to help walk them through their journey. If we're up against a skeptic and we're feeling attacked, they're criticizing us for our faith, having some go-to answers, even if we're not sharing them out loud, but just to be able to rationalize in our minds what it is that we're thinking about, what it is that we're talking about, can help us strengthen our faith. And then as we do have doubts that come into mind, and that'll be the main topic of today's class specifically, how do we address those doubts in a healthy way? Apologetics is kind of the word that we'll use. I'll come back to what that means in a little bit, but it has been shown to be effective in history. We even have examples where Paul is using apologetics, reasoning and rationale, as he's interacting with Judaism and Hellenism and even some early Gnosticism. St. Augustine used apologetics in the 4th and 5th century with the pagans at the time, and Aquinas used it to help slow down the spread of Islam. And so apologetics is a very effective tool in both defending the faith and defending Christianity as a whole. So, and also we live right across the street over there, I think. I lost my bearing here, from an academy, right, which challenges us to think critically about everything in the world. And so we should think critically about our faith as well. The other thing is that God gave us a mind and he wants us to use it. And so this is going to be accepting and acknowledging that we have a powerful tool, a powerful instrument in our skull that God wants us to use, and we'll be able to make more use of it throughout this class. I like this quote from apologist Bobby Conway, who said, "I see apologetics as a way we love the world with our minds." So, the passage about, what is the greatest commandment? To love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, right? So mind is one of those pieces, right? So we're not going to shy away from that, but we'll actually engage that. This class will use a number of videos. I just realized later on that all 3 videos that I'm using today have come from the same person. That's not typically the case. So you'll see this guy a couple of times, but I think he does a really good job of introducing this topic as well. Oh, but first, I'm sorry, the class verse, the verse that I'll keep coming back to is kind of the reason for what we do, is 1 Peter 3:15. "But in your hearts honor Christ as the Lord, as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is within you, and to do so with gentleness and respect." So there we really see the whole picture of apologetics. Not only is it that you should be prepared, so you don't just kind of wing it and figure it out on the fly, right? You have a reason for the hope. So you have some arguments, you have some logic, you have some go-to statements that you can think about. But then also you don't berate it over the other person, but you do it with gentleness and respect. And we'll hit on each of those components in a little bit. So that's our posture, by the way. It's not about winning an argument or walking away feeling victorious. Really, it's leaving that kind of work to the Holy Spirit, but rather just playing our part in another person's journey towards Christianity, or in another person's wrestling with Christian beliefs. All right, so why this class matters, the video is actually coming up next, my apologies, is again, all of us will experience doubt at some point, and so it's good to have a way to be prepared to deal with that. It's also about taking, so this is going to strengthen our faith. It's also about taking our neighbors seriously and the questions and concerns that they have seriously, and in so doing actually love our neighbors. If we are kind of flippant with them, or we don't try to help them with their struggles, or if we again kind of lord it over them, then we're not really loving our neighbors. And again, part of what we're going to try to come out of this class with is a sense of how to go about loving our neighbors. And then the comment was mentioned earlier about how there's just so much competing ideas in the world that it's kind of a noisy world that we live in. And so with apologetics, we can speak clearly. It's into that noisy world. It's actually a gift that we can give. Clarity is a gift that we can give to the world. So I mentioned a couple of times that The technical term behind this is called apologetics, which comes from the Greek word apologia, which means to defend. So it's not an apology about what we believe, but rather a defense. So apologetics is the word. Not going to focus on that too much, but this is the video I was thinking of that will speak into that just a little bit. It's an excerpt from one.
Why apologetics? Now, apologetics is not going around saying, I'm so sorry I'm a Christian, please forgive me. No. We make other people sorry we're Christians. No, we don't do that either, okay? That's just a joke. Simply put, Christian apologetics is a branch of theology that's concerned with giving a reason or defense for the Christian faith. Now, there are two sub-disciplines or categories of Christian apologetics. There's positive and negative apologetics. Now, positive apologetics involves giving an argument for Christianity. The emphasis is on offense, not defense. For example, we give arguments for God's existence, or for the reliability of the Bible, or for the deity of Christ. On the other hand, there's negative apologetics. And by negative, I don't mean bad. Negative apologetics involves answering objections or challenges against Christianity. So this is defense, not offense. For example, we answer the problem of evil, or respond to alleged Bible contradictions, or defend against the charge of being called intolerant. Now, when you hear the word apologetics, I want you to think of a lawyer standing in front of a judge and jury, giving a defense for their position. He gives arguments and counter-arguments. He's persuasive. That's what apologists do. They're making a case for their position.
For apologetics. Sorry, I cut it a little bit short there. So that's what apologetics is, and that actually gets to just a little bit about me. So I didn't introduce myself yet. If you haven't met me, my name is Jason. I've been attending TCBC for a long time, and I'll actually get to that part of my story here in just a moment. But I grew up in a non-Christian home and didn't really think much about church when I was little. And then in high school, I had a close friend of mine who was a Christian who just started challenging me in that. It's like, well, why don't you believe? What do you believe? Don't you believe anything? And I gave some, concerns and questions that I had about Christianity and why I felt like it was hard for me to accept that at the time. And she was very patient. She was very gracious and listening and doing a good job of helping me feel like, it's okay to have these questions. And she did what she could to answer them, but she wasn't necessarily in a position to answer all the questions that I had, mostly because I was coming at life from a very scientific approach. So I went on into undergrad here at U of I, studying physics, and I wanted to be able to explain how everything in the world worked through science. How does light come out of the light bulbs? Why is the sky blue? How does sound travel from my mouth to your ears, et cetera, et cetera? And I learned that, and that was great. But in some ways, it actually made it more challenging for me to accept Christianity, because it's like, I can explain everything. Why do I need this other thing to explain how the world works? And then, interestingly, I'm going to run to the back of the room because I forgot one of my visual aids here. A friend of mine recognized where I was coming from, and she gave me this book, The Creation Hypothesis by J.P. Moreland. And it basically goes through, and we'll actually cover some of this content in a later class, goes through the scientific proofs for Christianity, and specifically for God, actually, but nevertheless. And I'm like, wait a second, it's possible for these two worlds to coexist? I didn't think that was possible. I thought I had to give up my scientific beliefs in order to have religious beliefs. So it was really, really helpful to have both a couple of people in my life and resources like this to help me struggle through the doubts that I was having, through this intellectual hang-up that I was having with regards to Christianity. And so even now today, I still geek out on this stuff a little bit. One, because I love science still, even if I'm not practicing that. But nevertheless, I think apologetics is helpful for everyone. And in my case, it really took down the barriers, the obstacles to coming to Christ, and then eventually was able to actually do that and have been at this church ever since. So anyway, okay, so that's a little bit about me and my testimony, and just trying to acknowledge the fact that it is okay for everyone to wrestle with doubt, pre-Christian and Christian alike as well. So I wanted to take us into the topic of doubt just a little bit more. Okay, just checking where we are on time. So one thing I want to establish about this class is that, like I said, it is okay to have doubts. I think if we were honest, everyone in this room would probably raise their hand saying, yes, I've had doubts at some point in my life about my faith. Some of us grew up in church cultures where doubt was seen as a very shameful thing. Like, you just don't talk about it. You don't acknowledge that you have doubts. You kind of move on from that. You may be that you would be viewed as not strong in your faith. Like, how could you have doubts? You must not be pious enough. You must not be religious enough. You need to go to more Sunday school classes or what have you. But that's not the picture that the Bible gives. In Mark 9, and I don't have this on the slide, sorry, but in Mark 9, that's the passage where, I think I do actually. Yeah, is it okay to doubt? Yeah, where the person says, help my unbelief to Jesus himself. So you've got someone who is, actually the fuller quote is, I believe, help my unbelief. Right, so he's begging Jesus to help him, Jesus himself. He's not like shying away from like the person that should be, would have the ability to lord it over him. Jude 22 also says, have mercy on those who have doubt. So doubt is in the Bible and here and a few other places as well. It's kind of assumed that believers will experience doubt at some point in their lives. Here's a video that talks about a couple of other examples as well.
It's because these beliefs, listen, are the best explanation of reality. They fit the way the world really is. They're true. In that moment, apologetics wasn't esoteric or abstract. It was as practical as it gets. And so the church, Christians like you and me, they need it because apologetics helps to provide real responses to the reasons people leave the faith. By the way, the same thing happened to John the Baptist. As John the Baptist sat in prison for his faithfulness to God, he was afflicted with doubts about Jesus. In fact, John sends word to Jesus by his disciples and asks, are you the one who is to come, or should we look for another? Remember, this is the same John who at one time leapt in his mother's womb at the sound of Mary's voice. This is the same John who confidently declared, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. It's the same John who baptized Jesus and heard a voice from heaven say, this is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased. It's the same John. But now John is sitting in a Roman prison awaiting a probable execution, and he's wondering if he got it all wrong. I wonder if he also thought, what do I really know? He spent his life proclaiming that the Messiah would come and burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. But the chaff isn't burning. No, they're partying. So John begins to doubt. Now notice Jesus' response to John's disciples. Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear, and the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. This is Matthew 11, 4 and 5. Jesus doesn't tell John, look inside your heart for some subjective feeling. He doesn't tell John to ignore his doubts and just blindly believe. Rather, Jesus points to objective evidence to substantiate who he is. What's the evidence? The blind are seeing, the lame are walking, the deaf are hearing. In some, Jesus tells him to believe based on the works that he is doing. Jesus is doing apologetics. He's giving evidence for who he is. So why apologetics? Because when doubts come, and they will come, Christians like you and me need it.
So yeah, I suppose if Jesus engages in apologetics, it's probably a good thing for us too as well. I don't know, because the Bible said so. Sunday school answer allowed here. So anyway, so those are just some examples. And again, John the Baptist, I think, is a really powerful example. He had rubbed shoulders like literally and physically with Jesus and for many years throughout his life, and yet still had doubts. So I think it's reasonable. Jesus is accepting of the fact that there are doubts. And historically, we've seen that there are a lot of people who have doubts. So does anyone recognize any of these folks up here?
C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis, yeah. So C.S. Lewis said at one point that faith is the art of holding on to things your reason once accepted in spite of your changing mood. So like, yeah, just like the John the Baptist, like he accepted his faith, but then something happened. His mood obviously was changed because he was in prison, and that caused him to question a little bit. Who else do you recognize from this list?
Billy Graham.
Yeah, Billy Graham. So these are all people who struggled with faith at some point. So at one point, there's a quote from him, a prayer saying, "Father, I'm going to accept this as thy word by faith. I'm going to allow faith to go beyond my intellectual questions and doubts. And I will believe this to be your inspired word." So again, Billy Graham saying, I have questions, I have doubts. Mother Teresa, yeah. So she is once said, "Darkness is such that I really do not see, neither my mind nor my reason. The place of God in my soul is blank." So yeah, Mother Teresa, one of those folks that you think of as being like the most, deep in her faith, had darknesses within her soul that she struggled with. Moses, yep. So Moses in the story of the burning bush, right? That's one where clearly he's like doubting, both himself and of like, give me a sign, God. How will the people know? Like, help prove that you exist to me and to all of Israel. Francis Chan. There are times that I, Francis Chan, doubt my salvation. This is a guy who's prolific as a preacher, as an apologist, as a writer, that I doubt my salvation. There have been times in my life when I've even doubted the existence of God. Wow. And I'm not quoting these are quotes that are out there on the internet, of course, and everything. I'm not quoting these people in any way to disparage them. Again, that's the intention of this class, is to recognize that doubt is okay. Doubt is normal. Doubt is accepted by Jesus in the story of John the Baptist. We will all have our doubts. There are many other stories, and those I can share with you later on, but these are all just folks from, who else did we not talk about? John Calvin, the Apostle Thomas, Sarah and Abraham, and Billy Graham are the ones that we didn't talk about, but they all have had doubts as well. And so it's okay if you and I have doubts too. In fact, there's a Barna research study that said that 65% of Christians have experienced doubt at some point in their past. And at the time of the study, 26% were still experiencing doubts right then and there. So you might imagine a quarter of our church, for example, might be experiencing doubts right now. And 65%, so the person on your left and the person on your right, have experienced doubts in the past. So it's a common thing. It's a very understandable thing. Jesus understood it. And what I appreciate about doubt is that means you're already engaging your mind, right? If you're just kind of going, laissez-faire through life, rose-colored glasses and everything like that, and you weren't really thinking about your faith, you would never have doubts. You would just kind of move on through life. So I appreciate that anyone who does have doubts, myself included, part of that comes from just wrestling intellectually with what you believe. So doubt, in other words, is not the end of faith. It can actually be the beginning of a deeper faith because it pushes us to wrestle, to ask, and to grow. That's, again, how I'd like to frame it for this class, that doubts are welcome. We're not here to stigmatize honest questions, that we really want to shepherd ourselves through that doubting process together. And as we saw in that 1 Peter 3:15, with gentleness and respect. So if doubt is okay, how do we deal with doubt? We want to think clearly about truth, first of all. Before I get to that video, I just want to say a couple other things. Yep. First of all, that when people raise an objection to Christianity, whether that be ourselves, like how could I believe this because of blank, or someone else, oftentimes one of the underlying issues is a misunderstanding about what we're talking about truth. What is truth? And we know that from the world that we live in, there's all kinds of different perspectives about alternative truths and whatnot. And I'm not trying to make a political statement or anything like that. But as was mentioned earlier, the world is just noisy with so many different voices trying to represent what they say is truth. But we'll get to some examples in a moment. So let's look at this one.
The late philosopher and theologian Francis Schaeffer, he referred to apologetics as pre-evangelism. This is the idea that God uses well-reasoned answers and arguments as a springboard to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Oxford theologian Alistair McGrath, he says this: apologetics lays the ground for the invitation, evangelism extends it. That's it exactly. Apologetics and evangelism work together. For example, for many people, it makes no sense to talk about the Son of God, who communicates the Word of God, who performs acts of God, and brings the salvation of God, unless there is a God. This is where apologetics is so valuable. Apologetics lays the ground, it builds the foundation for belief in God through arguments and evidence. This is pre-evangelism. Now, in addition, the culture is deeply saturated in at least three dominant philosophies: relativism, pluralism, and naturalism. This is the cultural water that we all live in. Relativism says, well, there is no truth. Pluralism says there's no religious truth. And naturalism says there's no supernatural truth. Do you see a problem in doing evangelism in this cultural climate? We are presenting absolute truth to a relativistic culture, exclusivist message to a pluralistic culture, and a supernatural view to a naturalistic culture. It is no surprise that Christians are confronted with questions like, how can Jesus be the only way? Or, hasn't science proven that miracles are impossible? Or, who are you to force your morality on me? These questions are born out of a secular worldview that we swim in. Apologetics responds to these questions at the worldview level. Now, these philosophies produce questions that become obstacles to the gospel. I call them gospicles. Now, everyone say gospical. Okay, the apologist's job is to help remove these gospicles, these obstacles to the faith. We answer questions, respond to challenges, refute bad philosophy in the hope that people, with the help of the Holy Spirit, will be more receptive to hearing and receiving the gospel. In an address delivered in 1912, over 100 years ago at Princeton Theological Seminary, J. Gresham mentioned, he says, false ideas are the greatest obstacle to the reception of the gospel. Under such circumstances, what God desires us to do is to destroy the obstacle at its root. That's the job of apologetics. Not only does the Bible command apologetics, but the culture also demands we use apologetics to reach them.
Close enough. So again, kind of going back to my story, right? This book was the apologetics that removed the obstacles. I don't know if I can even say that word, right? You know, the obstacles to my faith, such that when others were able to come in, including this woman named Angie DeMeester, who later became my wife, she was able to help with the rest of that journey because these obstacles had been addressed for me. So again, I think it speaks to what we were talking about earlier about the cultural milieu that we're in, where there's all these different views about what is truth and can your truth be my truth and all that. So speaking of different types of truth, it's helpful to realize that when people are objecting about a truth, sometimes they're talking about subjective truths and sometimes they're talking about objective truths. So truth and preference are not the same thing. So an objective truth, sorry to get just a little academic on you here, is universally true whether you like it or not. It is absolutely true in every single situation, all the time, all the place, okay? Whereas a subjective truth is personally true, or it's a preference, or it's something that is true for me, but it is not actually true for you. We'll get to some examples of this here in just a second. Actually, let's just look at the examples now. So, pop quiz. Did you know you're getting graded on this? No, okay. Are these objective or subjective? So remember, objective, universally true. Subjective, it's based on the subject. I'm the subject of certain preferences. You're the subject of other preferences. All right. 2 + 2 = 4. Objective or subjective? Yeah, whether you like it or not, I'm afraid that it has been proven time and time again that 2 + 2 = 4. Ask kindergartners struggling with this and they're going to disagree with you, but at the end of the day, they're going to get the marks off on their quiz because 2 + 2 is indeed equal to 4. Chocolate is the best flavor of ice cream. It's subjective. It's written as an absolute true statement, right? If you were to just read it on their...
It's not even right.
Exactly. Right? So chocolate is best, right? It's written as 2 + 2 = 4, but it's not true for everyone, right? This is a preference. So it's important to realize that some truisms or some statements that are written as if they were true are actually subjectively true. So we have to listen for that objective versus subjective when we start to hear what comes at us from the world around us. How about the statement, absolute truth does not exist? This is a trick question.
That
It's self-inconsistent.
How so?
It gives an absolute truth,
Uh-huh.
and it says it doesn't exist.
Right. So this is a self-contradictory statement. It's trying to make objective truth statement. Absolute truth does not exist. But if that were true, then that statement could not be true. So that's also a helpful thing to realize, is that this is something that the world might tell us that, oh, there are no absolute truths. There are multiple versions of truth. Wait a second, that doesn't even make sense, right? How about this one? Truth is relative. It's also a trick question in the same spirit.
Could be relative, but it's truth.
Yeah, I mean, how does that even make sense? You can't say something is absolutely true, but then also say that true is relative. Like some things are more true than others, but you're just making an absolute true statement that's not relative to anything else. You're not saying truth is relative on days where it's more than 90 degrees outside, right? Or something weird like that, right? And one more. God exists. Objective or subjective claim?
I would say objective, because whether we believe it or not, God exists.
Yeah, that's our vantage point, right? Is this is an objective claim, but from the world's perspective, when we make that claim, they think that's subjective. So here's where there's a difference in definitions, and we'll come to how important having a shared definition is in a moment. But for us, and for reasons that we'll cover in the next 10 weeks of this class, that is an objective truth. But for the world, it can be a subjective truth. Okay. Okay, so we just did that. Okay, so now let's talk about this quote. Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. So in those cases where, this is from Colossians, in those cases where you are receiving from the outside some sort of subjective truth, God is not real, some other God is real instead, right? They're giving us their perspective on things. Or I'm thinking back to when my kids were younger and they told me, what do you mean? I did do the dishes, or I did clean my room. Look at your room. Did you clean your room? No, right? There's times where I might be tempted to just say, no, you're wrong, and just get kind of angry about the fact that you're saying this is true and I know it's not true. We need to, as this says, always be gracious, seasoned with salt. How can we possibly do that? Especially if you're like me at times and struggle with, like, if this is just wrong, I don't want to acknowledge that. I just get kind of frustrated. There are two best friend questions, BFF questions, that we're going to use throughout this class. And they are simply, well, what do you mean by that? And how did you come to that conclusion? If you say these things in response to any of the truths that are being presented at you and you don't necessarily agree with them, these two questions, you don't have to have answers to their objections. You don't have to get frustrated. You can just start with these two questions. So thinking back to the example I gave of my children saying that their room was clean. Well, what do you mean by clean exactly? Oh, you mean that all of the toys are put away. That's your definition of clean. My definition of clean is that all the toys are put away, all the clothes are put away, your bed is made, et cetera, et cetera. See how we can have a disagreement, not about the room is clean, but a disagreement about, well, what do you mean by the room is clean? And the second one, how did you come to that conclusion? Okay, maybe the kid example is a little bit differently, but this is where you can start to understand the person's thought process, the reasoning. If A, then B, then C, then D, if there's like a chain of thoughts, you only have to prove that one element of that chain is broken. And then the entire argument unfolds. Not to say that they couldn't try to reconstitute it or what have you, but if you start to, this helps you understand where they're coming from, and it gives you more clear opportunities to say, wait a second, that's actually not true. This part of your argument is not true. All right, so we're going to do a brief activity together called a Think, Pair, Share. I'm going to present the claim of a skeptic as an example. And I want you to think about what would be your response to that claim. And remember your two BFF questions, okay? So think about probably one of those two questions. And if you were to ask that question of the skeptic, let's pretend I'm the skeptic, just imagine what my response to that would be. So I'm going to present something, you're going to say, what do you mean by blank? imagine what I would say, what I mean by blank. Okay, I'll give you the question here in just a moment. And then how do you respond to that? So just imagine a couple of steps back and forth in this dialogue. That's the goal here, right? I want you to take just a single minute or so and jot down your initial thoughts. And if you don't have paper, electronic, that's fine. Just kind of at least imagine how would you see this conversation going? And then I'll give us a few minutes to turn to a neighbor and share your ideas, maybe grow and challenge each other or ask different perspectives. And then we'll have a discussion as a class, okay? So that's the basic ideas. We're gonna take a minute, think about it ourselves, then we'll join up with a partner or two, and then we'll discuss it as class. So the claim, all religions basically teach the same thing. We've probably heard that out there in the culture that we live in. Objective or subjective, you could think about that, but take just a moment and ask yourself, what would be your response if I came up to you and say, you're a Christian? Well, that's fine, but all religions basically teach the same thing. What would be your response to me? And how would you imagine a skeptic might respond to you? And then how might you respond to them? So just take a minute, think that through. All right, let's come back together here. So if I were to say to you, all religions basically teach the same thing, you have probably two questions you could ask me. I don't know, what's one of them? How did I come to that conclusion? Well, for example, Sarah, I've just looked at all the different teachings out there, and they all teach about how it's important to be good, to be nice. And so I'm a good person, I'm a nice person, so I'm going to heaven. How might someone respond to that part of a skeptic's response? I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, if they're all teaching the same thing, as long as I do the same thing, then we get the same result.
Then I start arguing. Because they all teach love and hate. You think of Muslims and infidels.
Yeah, that's true. So there are exceptions to what I was saying. Yeah, absolutely.
What do you mean by being good?
Oh, okay. So my definition of being good is killing everyone who doesn't believe what I believe. The Muslims. Okay, so we might have some differences of opinion about what that means, about what good is. We'll come to the conversation about absolute good later on. Starting over, all religions basically teach the same thing. What else might you ask me?
I would ask you, do you believe that Jesus died and rose again?
Let's say no, because I mean that's 2,000 years old. Like there's so many ways in which like the records would have been falsified and so forth. So no, I don't believe that part. I believe that there's good morals to the stories that he teaches, but I don't think that detail is necessarily important for me to get to heaven.
What's the same thing?
Say that again.
What is the same things? If all religions basically
Oh,
teach
yeah.
the same thing,
Okay, so what are those same things? So whether that, so that's where I could list off, be good to one another, love people, be kind, and that's where we can have the discussion about are those actually truly all the same thing across all religions? Do they have the same definition of what good means, etc.? Yeah. So, yeah, we don't have to go too much further into that, but I hope that challenged you to just put into practice those two questions, and we'll have other opportunities in later classes to, try to try out in this safe space what might a response to a skeptic look like, so that you have a little bit of experience, and if you did find yourself talking to someone and they were challenging your beliefs, you could have a couple of go-to questions, a couple of go-to responses. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the class as a whole, moving beyond doubt and what is apologetics now. So the goals of this class are to help you feel strengthened in defending your faith when facing persecution. And persecution, by the way, here is a broad definition. What do you mean by persecution, right? One of your BFF questions you should ask me. I am not talking about martyrdom or going overseas and really wrestling with it in a very visceral way. I'm talking about you're at a football game and someone says, hey, what'd you do this weekend? It's like, oh, I went to church. And like, church? What? That passive aggressive or that microaggression kind of approach, that is a form of persecution. So I want you to feel strengthened in those situations to say, yeah, I did go to church. You want to talk about it? Maybe that was a little too aggressive. Sorry. But anyway, bottom line is to feel strengthened. Also to be equipped to counter those obstacles to the gospel, the gospels, if I'm saying that right. Again, minimally already you have the two BFF questions. But throughout the course of this class, we'll discover some more counter arguments, if you will. And then lastly, I think it can be isolating to think about this and to think, I don't know who to talk to about this. I don't really have people who've really kind of challenged me in this way. I don't have people who think about these kinds of issues and so forth. And so my hope is that this group here can become a like-minded community of believers as we talk this through. And then you can, talk to those people again down the road as well. In terms of what we're going to cover, just to give you a preview of that, I'm going to hand out 2 things with this. That's more than I need. First is just an attendance sheet, and just so you know, I like Pastor John's joke here. He tried, but apparently heaven does not have a fax machine, and so cannot receive copies of this. The point being, if you don't attend every class, that is perfectly fine. First of all, the classes are designed to be independent of one another, so you don't have to come to one in order to understand what's happening in the following week. And then also, life happens, right? That's totally okay. It's okay to have doubts. It's okay to miss a Sunday school class. If you are able to make it, here's the basic idea. There's 3 main sections of the class. The first is the Worldview Foundations, and this is on the handout that you'll get in just a moment, just so you know. So today we talked about what is apologetics, and we talked about, is doubt okay? Hopefully you came away from today understanding that, yes, indeed, doubt is okay. Next week, we'll talk about, does God exist? So if you already believe that part, you could skip out of next. No, I'm kidding. The idea is that you'll be able to explain to others a little bit more about your belief and why you believe that God exists. You're going to have your own personal experiential reasons for that you already have. My goal is to equip you with some more kind of general reasons that would help in a conversation with others and help when you have your own moments of doubt as well. Then we will move on to, does science contradict religion? Again, that was one of the big hangups for me a long time ago, but it still is relevant in society today. We'll talk about science has a scope of responsibility for explaining a portion of the world that we live in, and religion has another scope of responsibility, and those do not overlap entirely. At the end of September, we'll talk about how do we interpret Genesis. So this will include everything from young earth creationism, old earth creationism, evolution, the genre of literature of Genesis, and so forth. So that'll be at the end of September. And that'll wrap up the foundations section. Then we'll move on to Christian truth claims. We'll talk about, is the Bible trustworthy? Again, I tried to kind of counteract one of your questions by saying, the thing is 2,000 years old. How can it possibly be reliable? We'll talk about the proofs that it is indeed reliable. Then we'll move on into, was Jesus a real person, or was he that fairy tale, a good story, good moral ideas in that story, but was he a real person? By the way, the answer to most of these questions is yes, but I pose them as questions. And then we'll talk about, okay, sure, maybe Jesus was real, but people don't just rise from the dead. That's scientifically impossible. How can I believe that a human being, presumably, rose from the dead? We'll talk about proofs for that as well. And then the last section is on hard objections. So what do we hear culture pushing back on Christianity with? How can a good and powerful God allow suffering in the world? So that's the probabilistic and moral issue of evil. Is Jesus the only way to God? Doesn't it seem kind of condescending for you Christians to say there's only one way to heaven? That doesn't seem very loving now, does it? Okay. How does God square with morality, identity, and meaning? So that gets back to the objective and subjective truths a little bit. It does touch on a little bit about sexual identity, which there's a whole separate class for that, if that's particularly your interest. Otherwise, we'll do a very short piece on that. And then lastly, how do we put this into practice? Again, we'll have little interactive segments in every class session like we did today, but we'll have a little bit more of a focused session in the last class. So again, it's okay to miss this class. Like today, I think today was kind of prototypical of what you'll see in other Sundays. There'll be lots of videos, not all from the same white guy. Interactive elements like the role-playing, think, pair, share, so forth. And again, we will ask the tough questions in this class. And it's okay to not absorb everything. I am going to give you a lot of information in this class. And if you don't remember all of it, that's okay. Really, the goal is not to remember all of it, but rather 3 years down the road when someone's challenging you with, well, don't we all just come from apes? You can think in the back of your mind, wait a second, I don't remember the answer to that question, but I remember talking about it. I can go look it up. I can have confidence that there is an answer or two to questions like that. But really, as long as you take away your two best friend questions, the ones that we talked about today, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? That itself is the main victory. There will be the recordings. That's why I have this camera sitting up here in the middle and why I have an earbud in my ear. So I will be posting recordings. So if you do miss and you want to catch up, you can do that. Give me a few days after each Sunday to get that posted, as well as just slides, additional resources, links to sermons. So you may recall that Pastor Brian had a 4-ish week sermon series talking about responding to skeptics. I'll reference those. Also link to them where relevant. Books like the one that I was sharing with you. There's a few other books in the back of the room. I'm going to have more books from our church library next week. Websites, other YouTube videos. There's a plethora of YouTube videos out there on this topic, and I'm trying to curate just the best. But if you want to go deeper into other topics, I'll have links to those as well. Last two things, there is a class website. If you're familiar with Church Center, that's the app that we use for like our giving statements and for registering our attendance in the mornings and so forth. There's a group that you can go to that will have all of the resources in it as well as the recordings. The website is really hard to remember, tcbc.cc/reasonablefaith. Also, in the check sheet, if you want me to sign you up for you into that group, you can check your name, check the box at the end of the row on that. That's where, again, we'll have the bonus content, recordings of this class, etc. And then the very last thing is if you have 2 minutes of time, would love to have you fill out an anonymous 4-question survey. You can either get it from the link that I'll send out to anyone who joins that group, or you can just scan this QR code and fill it out later. This just helps me understand both where you all coming from, what are the tough questions you'd like to see this class address, and if I don't have a plan for that, I'll try to work that in. And then what would be most helpful to you in terms of getting the most out of this class. So short and sweet survey there. Okay. Any questions before we go? All right, well then let me pray us out this morning. Father God, thank you so much for bringing us all together and to have this opportunity to, just really challenge ourselves in what we believe, to prepare ourselves for the challenges that others might bring. And thank you for the historical examples that you've given where doubt is okay. And so for those of us who are currently experiencing doubt or may have experienced doubt in the past or in the future, Lord, thank you for reaffirming us through the example of John the Baptist that you understand that happens and that you want to give us evidences to counteract those doubts. So equip us today with what we've learned with the 2 questions and other takeaways from this class, and equip us in the weeks ahead as well. Pray for your blessing on our worship of you this morning upstairs and for the rest of our day. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, thank you, everybody.